Was asked to talk about how healthy relationships have the power to heal us. And as I began to do research on this topic to prepare for this presentation, I said, man, I need to give it a different title because there's more scientific data. I need a little bit more volume on this, please. There's more scientific data that exists to demonstrate how toxic relationships, unhealthy relationships, have the power to make us sick or even to kill us. So you can look at this as a presentation where information will be given to you and you just have to figure out, is the glass half empty or half full? And if the information is telling you how an unhealthy relationship will hurt you, well, just think about, well, if you turn the relationship around and make it healthy, it's going to have a good, positive impact upon you and your health, overall health. Can you guys hear me okay? Microphones are working? All right, good deal. My name is Jason. If you're here for the first time, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm the pastor of this church. Been married for 5 years, a father of a 4-year-old, in that order. And so I'm glad you're here today to celebrate more wholeness of spirit. Is this going to work? Let me see. Maybe it's turned off. All right. There it goes. All right. So what's wholeness of spirit? I want to make sure we have our terms defined together today because some of you may realize that, oh, wait a minute, he's not a medical doctor, he's a pastor. And is he going to use this opportunity to preach at me, to make me feel guilty about myself, to condemn me, or to win me over to his point of view or his religion or faith? So if you're having that anxiety today, I hope to put it aside because we're using this term spirit, and I want to define what I mean by that. What is wholeness of spirit? There are things in this world that are material, things that we can touch, things that we can feel. A chair, your body, all material things. And we know that they exist because we can see them, and we can touch them, we can manipulate them, and so on and so forth. There are other realities in life for which we cannot see, which we cannot feel. Your emotions are an example. On the screen, you see some examples of wholeness of spirit, and you may look at some of those descriptions and say, oh, those are emotions. Well, emotions we cannot touch and we cannot see. But do they impact us? Yes, they most certainly do. But don't think that today's presentation, because it's on relationships and because some of these things that we can discuss could be described as emotions, don't think that this is necessarily just a topic on emotional health. It's broader than that. Because outside of our emotions, we also have things like our character. Patience, kindness, goodness. Those are character qualities. Can you touch and see character? Not necessarily. And our relationships, the relationships we have, whether they're healthy or whether they're unhealthy, our relationships are not things that you can necessarily touch, like this pew here. It's not material. So we're taking these things that we can't physically touch or see, and we're putting them under the umbrella of spirit or spiritual things. Does this make sense? All right? So think of these things like the wind. You can't see the wind, but you know the impact that the wind is making by what the wind does to other things. You can't see the wind. You can't necessarily touch the wind, though you may feel the breeze, but you see that tree blowing from side to side. You see the leaves falling, and you say, the wind is making an impact. Well, our emotions, our character, and our relationships make a profound impact, especially upon our physical health. So when we're talking about spirit or spiritual things, these are the things we're talking about, and maybe that'll put some of you fears aside if you came in this place wondering, oh dear, is this a spiritual talk? Is this a pastor? Where are we going with this presentation? All right, so let's jump into our presentation today. We're talking about how healthy or unhealthy relationships have the power to heal or to hurt us. We're gonna look at a case study of a patient here. We're gonna call her Veronica today. Let's look at her case study, her inventory perhaps. You go to a doctor's office, they ask you a bunch of questions, they write these things down. And in the case of Veronica, she's not married. She's probably in her late 20s, early 30s here. She's from the Middle East. She has a religion of being a devout Jew, devout in her Jewish faith. And she's got several diagnoses here on her medical history. They all revolve around the same types of issues. She has frequent and constant and consistent bleeding outside of her menstrual cycle. And she's had this condition for 12 years. She has seen multiple physicians over the 12 years trying to get a solution for this problem. And you can think about this. If she's having this problem, she's dealing with physical pain, constant bleeding, and she's dealing with not only the physical pain, she's also dealing with lethargy, loss of energy. All right, so this is a big physical problem in her life. It's causing complications. And if her doctors and her physicians ask her, well, what else is going on in your life? What's a problem for you? She will tell you, I'm really stressed out financially. Why? Because she's been spending 12 years of her life going to physician after physician after physician. She's racked up medical bills, and she is broke and bankrupt over this. And so not only is she stressed out financially, she's also frustrated that in the 12 years that she's been going to all these doctors, she feels that some of them have actually made the problems worse with the medication and with the treatments that they've given her. All right. Now, in this case study alone, if we just looked at her 12-year history, all the different treatments she's gotten, the fact that they haven't worked out well, and the stress that she is dealing with financially, we'd say this woman has enough on her plate, would we not? And we'd say that this disease where she's dealing with chronic pain and chronic fatigue, this is her problem. But I would suggest to you that if you look at this case study, you would discover that she's having more relationship problems that are adversely impacting her health than her physical disease. Now you'd say, well, wait a minute, how in the world could you look at just this data that's on the screen and come to a conclusion that she's got relationship problems that are impacting her health worse than her physical disease that she's been wrestling with for the past 12 years? And this is how I can tell you that. Because this case study comes from ancient documents that were recorded from the Roman Empire in the 1st century. 3 ancient documents contain this case study that we're talking about here. One of them was written by a physician. So this is a well-documented case study from antiquity. I have just included the recording from one that's more detailed here. And so that's on the screen. Now, if we understand that this is coming from the 1st century, we know the context of history, and we take into consideration this person's faith, that she's a devout Jew, and we understand the Jewish beliefs of that time regarding her health and her health situation, then we can begin to draw accurate conclusions about the relationships that she has in her life and how those relationships are impacting her health as badly as her physical disease, or perhaps even impacting her health worse. Today we're going to look at 3 relationships that Veronica has that her disease is impacting, and how those relationships are impacting her health. And as we look at each one of these relationships that Veronica has, I'm going to suggest to you that you have the same kinds of relationships in your life. I have the same kinds of relationships that Veronica has in my life. And so, as we look at each relationship that Veronica has, each relationship that we have, as we go through these 3 relationships, I'm going to give you at the end of each relationship a prescription. Things that we can do to improve our relationships. And as we improve our relationships in these 3 spheres, it will have an impact upon our physiology, our health, and our well-being. Too many times we say, okay, the body is over here, the body is separate, and what we do spiritually over here with faith and religion over there, that's one thing, and then your relationships, that's a separate bucket, and they're all in their different compartments. That's not true. What happens in one area impacts the other areas as well. So this is where we're going to go. So let's look at the 3 relationships that Veronica has and that we have as well. The first relationship is that Veronica has and what we have is the relationship with other people. The relationship that we have with other people. So when we understand her faith in the context of where she is in the first century Roman Empire, we understand that this issue of bleeding, the Jewish faith had rules for women, anyone who's dealing with a condition where they're bleeding outside of the normal menstrual cycle. And because of these rules, this lady would be called unclean, would be considered unclean. And if you had that label, that diagnosis of being unclean because of a bleeding condition, you couldn't touch other people. You couldn't be in close proximity to other people. Because if you touch them and were in close proximity, they may now be considered unclean as well. And now that you've made them unclean, they have to go through the inconvenience of going through whatever processes the Jewish religion prescribed to go back to getting into clean status again. One of them would be you'd have to take your ritual baths and different things along these lines. So she's dealing with a situation that whenever the infrequent bleeding comes about, she is now unclean, and she has to stay away from people, and people want to stay away from her. So are her relationships healthy, do you think, or are they unhealthy with other people? She is very lonely. She is very isolated. We said before, she's not married. Her disease would have certainly complicated not only the marital relationship, but because of their Jewish faith, her condition would make a marriage almost impossible because she'd be making her husband unclean. Now her husband has to stay away from people all the time, and he can't go to work, and he can't do his job. It just makes relationships with everyone extremely complicated. And so people are wanting to stay away from her. She's wanting to stay from other people. And so she becomes extremely lonely and extremely isolated. Now, this may blow your mind, what we're going to talk about next, this whole loneliness factor and isolation. Did you know that lacking social connection, being lonely, is now considered as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day? That is almost a pack a day of smoking of cigarettes. Someone told me recently there's about 20 cigarettes in a pack of cigarettes. This slide may be difficult to see, but you see that line at the top. It says lacking social connection. So we're talking about being lonely, being isolated, is a more predictor of things like stroke, heart attack, other disease, dementia. It has a more negative impact upon you than not exercising, than being obese. So some of us are more worried about, I'm not exercising enough, I need to exercise. Some of us are worried about, I'm definitely worried about, because I knew I grew a little bit over the holidays. I had the pleasure of upgrading in life. I went from a large to an XL on my T-shirt in the last 6 months. So I'm worried. So I can be worried. We get worried about whether or not we're getting enough exercise. I got to get new clothes. We're worried about our weight. We should be worried more about investing, if we want to invest into our health and our well-being, be worried about investing into our relationships and how connected we are with other people. Whether we feel love and support, whether we trust people around us, whether we have friendships, and whether we are investing in those friendships. Now, this stuff made national headlines. You may or may have not paid attention or realized this. Just 2 months ago in November, you had the World Health Organization making this a huge deal, that loneliness and isolation is impacting our health to extreme detriment. You had our U.S. Surgeon General, and back in November, making a big push and wanting to make this whole issue where people could feel comfortable talking about their loneliness and isolation. And what do you think exasperated or made the situation about loneliness and isolation worse in our culture to where it became a world health issue, or that the U.S. Surgeon General would make it something for our attention as a nation? What do you think recently happened that made people more lonely? All right, thank you. The pandemic, COVID-19. So we did social distancing. We stayed at home. We stayed away from people and all these kinds of, we were fearful of being around people. Now, we did the social distancing during the pandemic, but there's something else that has happened during the same period that's also related to the word social? What thing has happened in our society of increasing popularity? Social distancing is not popular, but it also begins with social. Social media. Exactly. So we're on our devices, we're in Facebook, we're in all these things, TikTok, whatever it is, and we're all into the social media. Now pay attention to this. So we're seeing an increase in our society of social isolation, people being lonely, disconnected from one another, not trusting one another, having bad relationships in their own family. And so as we're becoming more lonely as a society and it's impacting our health, during the same period, we've got this phenomenon of technology going on in our world called social distancing, and people are enjoying it. And in 2023, the average person spent 2 hours and 31 minutes on social media daily. This is the average person. I hope you're exceptional. Hope it's less for you. 2 hours and 31 minutes on social media daily. Now, this is also, when you compound this with how much time the average American spends watching some form of media, television, movies. We got that. We carry with it now on our devices, our phones and our iPads. We can take all this media, YouTube. So we got people watching stuff on screens, and then you add that the 2 hours and 31 minutes daily where we're... Have you ever done that? You just find yourself long periods of time just searching for things, all right? So 2 hours and 31 minutes on social media, plus the other forms of entertainment where we're looking at a screen. What do you think that's going to do to you? It could make you feel depressed. It could probably make you feel more lonely because you're engaging on a platform, on a screen, instead of being face-to-face with someone and having a conversation. Being in relationship, talking with someone, investing in their life and them investing in your life, reading body language, laughing together. So we're having relationships that are fake on a screen, and then we turn off the program, but we don't have something real and substantial in our own life. Or we think we have friends on social media, but we're being voyeuristic. It's a one-way relationship, but we're not connected in a way that brings health and healing. Now, if you spend 2 hours and 31 minutes on social media daily, you're not in real relationships. What kind of impact is that going to have upon you? And I'm not down on social media. I'm giving us a warning of what we need to do to be aware of how it's impacting our relationships and our overall health. So, 2 hours and 31 minutes on social media daily last year, but people who use social media for the same amount of time report feeling socially isolated rather than those who are on social media for 30 minutes or less using the same apps. So the average person is spending enough time on social media where they're reporting feeling more lonely as a result, because it's where you're investing your time. You're investing your time in front of screens instead of interacting with and being engaged with real people and real relationships. That's the risk that we have. Now, again, I want to bring in ancient wisdom to this conversation. I am a pastor. This is a church. I'm not here to try to convince anyone or convert anyone on anything, but I'm a person of faith. So I want to draw in ancient wisdom when ancient wisdom applies to what modern science is telling us, okay? Now, this is fascinating. Whether or not you believe that the story of Genesis of our origins is true or not, I just want you to consider, regardless of whether you believe that story is true or myth or legend, just consider the ancient wisdom. The story is, in Genesis, it's recorded of God creating this world and mankind in a period of 6 days. And Genesis says that at the end of each and every one of those days when God creates something, he sits back at the end of the day and he goes, it's good. Day 1, it's good. Day 2, it's good. Day 3, it's good. Day 4, it's good. Day 5, it's good. Day 6 creates a man, leaves the man alone with the animals for a while. And then God says, it is not good that man should be alone. I'm going to help him out with that. I'm going to make him a helper comparable to him. So get this. As the story is told, this is a place of perfection. This is a place of paradise. And as the story is told, nothing bad has entered into this world. So in a place of perfection and in a place of paradise where nothing wrong has happened, God is saying that isolation, being lonely, is that bad for us. That's profound. Whether you believe the story is true or not, consider the ancient wisdom that the story is trying to convey for our health and our well-being in our life. This is a picture, it's an illustration on the extreme level of what we're talking about, how negative relationships impact our physiology and our well-being. On the left-hand side, you have a brain scan of a 3-year-old child. That 3-year-old child is in a home where that child is cared for and loved. The brain scan on the right is a brain scan of the 3-year-old child from Romania who's come out of an orphanage. If you remember, it's a long time ago, in the late 80s and early 90s, Romania was ruled by a dictator, and when that dictatorship fell, the world was appalled to realize that there were all these children, orphan children, thousands of them, being housed in orphanages where they were suffering from extreme neglect. On the right-hand side, the 3-year-old Romanian child, what do you notice that's different about that brain scan? This child has either been abused by the caregivers or the other kids in the orphanage, so bad relationships for that child. And it's either had neglect, so been isolated, no relationships, no adequate care, no love, no attunement, no concern. What do you notice about the brain scan on the right of extreme neglect? How is it different from the one on the left? Anyone want to give me an Okay, the brain is smaller, very good. What else? Well, it's not going to work as good. What on the picture do you see that would lead you to believe why it's not going to work as good? All right. It may be difficult to see because of the lighting here, but don't you see that there's 2 black spots in the brain on the right that are larger than the brain on the left? Okay. Remember, it's a 3-year-old, so the brain is still in the process of developing. So the black holes are brain matter that is not yet developed. The 3-year-old on the left has more brain matter that's developed, therefore the holes are smaller. That brain is still developing. More tissue and growth is still to occur. But the child who's been dealing with abuse and neglect and isolated and being treated poorly in relationship has larger black holes. That means brain matter literally is not developing. There's holes in the brain. Also, if you notice around the brain, you see more black lines around the child of extreme neglect. More black around the brain, more black lines coming into the brain. That's because the neocortex portion of the brain is growing less as well in this child. This is an example. It's an extreme one, but it gives you a sense and an understanding that bad relationships, abusive relationships, and isolation literally impacts our bodies. All right? But the inverse is true. The inverse is true. If we become more connected, if we invest more in our relationships, if we take time to work and improve upon our marriages, not only are we going to feel the lift from the fact that we have love and support and our relationships are going more smoothly and we're experiencing the emotions of being happier, but this also has the impact to be able to heal us and impact our physiology. Does this make sense? Are you with me? All right, very good. Okay, I saw some of you taking pictures of that. It is very sad and fascinating research from what happened to these children in Romania. All right, so here is a relationship for healthy relationships with others. Remember, we're talking about Veronica's relationship. We're talking about your relationships. So one of the things that you can do a prescription is improve your relationship IQ. Do you know how to spot manipulative people? People who are going to be in relationships with you and for all the wrong reasons? Do you know how to have a filter between the relationships that you should allow and the relationships that you should keep at bay? Or are you good at being a friend? All of us, I believe, have some weaknesses in our relationships, blind spots in our relationships. And one author that I found extremely helpful to read to not only get a sense of what to do about the bad relationships in your life that are impacting you negatively, but how to be good and better at doing relationships is Dr. Henry Cloud. Anything that you can find from Dr. Henry Cloud is going to help you with your relationship IQ, to be able to screen out bad relationships, to be able to be a better partner and a better friend, and to do relationships better. We've also talked about the impact of social media. You want to limit that and be careful about that. If you're married, you want to make an investment in your marriage, whether it's going to marriage counseling, whether it's going to a marriage enrichment event. Anything that can improve your marriage is not only going to make your spouse happier, make you happier, it's going to make you healthier. Volunteering and serving others, much data that exists out there on the impact of your health, of being altruistic and serving and helping others. Get to know your neighbors. Most people don't know their neighbors. I don't know my neighbors like I should. Take a class, anything that's going to get you around other people, learning something new. That's how you form relationships. Invest in the lives of your coworkers beyond just the job. Play. Anything that you can do to play with other people is building relationships and building positive relationships, being on a team, working on the goal of winning. Get involved in a chess club. There's Scrabble clubs over at our library here in Mount Dora. Pickleball is a big thing now that a lot of people are doing. So that's a great way of meeting people. But all relationships take time. And I want to give you some ancient wisdom. Again, I'm referring to ancient wisdom when it comes to how we can improve upon our relationships. Ancient wisdom that validates what we're seeing in science. Relationships take time. So I am going to impart upon you some ancient wisdom that comes from Judaism and that also comes from my tribe, being a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. And we would recommend, and you're going to see why, I'm going to share with you some fascinating information as to why keeping the Sabbath is also going to help you and your health, because relationships take time. Seventh-day Adventist Christians live 11 years longer than the average person in North America. Seventh-day Adventist Christians observe, I'm going to come back to that slide I just showed you, but I just want to plant this in your mind, 11 years longer. And one of the things that Seventh-day Adventist Christians do, like devout Jews, is to keep the Sabbath, a 24-hour period of time on the seventh day of the week, where we refrain from work, where we refrain from the normal rhythm of the past 6 days, and then use that 24-hour period of time to invest in our most important relationships. Those most important relationships certainly could be our most important relationship with our Maker, with God, a higher power, our most important relationships with our family and other people that we worship with, other connections. So keep that in mind. When we're talking about keeping a Sabbath, we're talking about 24 hours where you downshift from your normal rhythm, where you're not worried about work, and you intentionally focus on your most important relationships in life, because all relationships take time if they're going to be strong and if they're going to be healthy. All right, so we said Seventh-day Adventists, Jews do this, Seventh-day Adventists do this, keeping the Sabbath, and we said Seventh-day Adventists in particular have been researched to find that they live 11 years longer than the average person in North America. Well, the average person in North America lives, and you're going to probably want to take a screenshot of this too, the average American lives 77 years. So let's convert 77 years into days. How do we do that? We take 77 years and we multiply it by what? 365 days. So the average American will live 28,105 days. If the average American kept the Sabbath, that means every 7 days they're downshifting, they're not working, and they're investing in their most important relationships in life. That means you take that number, 28,105, and you divide it by 7. Every 7 days you have the seventh day is the Sabbath. So that would mean the average American would devote 4,015 days to their most important relationships in life by keeping the Sabbath. That's a lot of days. Now, what would happen if we convert the days, 4,015 days that the average person would keep keeping the Sabbath, and we would convert those days into years? How would we do that? Anyone know how to do the math? You divide that by 365. If you divide 4,015 days by 365 to convert it to years, how many years do you get? No one's got their calculator out? No? You get 11 years. Some of you don't get why that's important. If the average, if the average Seventh-day Adventist Christian lives 11 years longer than the average person in North America, that means that all the Sabbaths the Seventh-day Adventists are keeping could be attributed to what keeps them living 7 years longer. And that illustrates the healing power of investing in your most important relationships. I've given you two of the best examples I know how. The two brains that were compared side by side to show you the impact of negative relationships upon our healing. This is the best example I know. That if you take time on a regular weekly basis to downshift and focus upon your most important relationships by keeping the seventh-day Sabbath, it can have that kind of positive impact upon your overall health and wellness. All right. So we talked about Veronica. We talked about her relationships with other people. Now we're going to talk about another relationship we have, and that relationship is with a higher power. Some people would call that God, a spiritual dimension. Veronica is considered unclean. We talked about that. The unclean status would not only keep her away from other people, and other people want to stay away from her, but she wouldn't be able to go into worship gatherings. She wouldn't be able to go into temple. She wouldn't be able to go into synagogue because of her status when she's going through this bleeding time. So she's cut off from God's people. She's socially isolated, but now in the spiritual realm, the opportunity to worship, the opportunity to connect with a higher power is being cut off from her. And we also know from ancient first-century documents that come out of the Roman Empire that Jews at this time had a belief, had a concept that unfortunately still resounds today in modern history in many religious faiths. And this is the belief that if you are a moral or righteous person, you will automatically receive financial blessings and health and prosperity. But if you have created some great sin, or if you've done something wrong and that's been immoral, you will be punished by God with poverty and sickness. This is the belief that was happening at that time. So if this woman Veronica's been experiencing health, and all of a sudden she gets this disease, and the disease progresses for 12 years, and it's beginning to get worse, no matter what doctor and physician. Can you imagine Veronica is probably looking and wondering, what in the world did I do, God? What sin did I commit? Why are you out to get me? Why are you striking me down with this awful thing? Because that was the belief during that time. If you're a righteous and good person, you're going to be rich and you're going to be healthy. But if you've done something sinful and bad and immoral, God is going to curse you with poverty and with poor health. And she's got both. Poverty and poor health. And she's probably wondering, what in the world, God? Why do you have it out against me? What did I do? And so she is not only dealing with being cut off from the higher power and sense of places of worship, but she is feeling a disconnect from a higher power herself. And I'm using that term higher power simply because when we're talking about how a connection with a higher power, with a God, with a maker, with a creator has a power to heal us, think about those who are wrestling with addiction. We talked about power of spirit, health of spirit, lacking self-control. When someone's dealing with an addiction and they want to get well and they want to deal with these spiritual realities, a lack of self-control, unhappiness, a lack of joy because of an addiction, they enter into a 12-step support group. Do you know what the first step in the 12 steps always is? It's acknowledging that there is a higher power. I am out of control, lack of self-control, that's a spiritual problem. A lack of self-control, I do not have self-control, and therefore I must submit to a higher power. That's the first step towards healing. That's the impact, that's the power of our relationship of connection with God. Now, in the first century documents that I'm talking about, and I've been referring to, Jesus of Nazareth, this Jewish carpenter, this Jewish rabbi, he attempted to strike down this mindset that was prevalent within his own faith community. Jesus says, no. God is not out blessing the righteous and striking down those who are unrighteous. God sends rain upon the righteous and the unrighteous, Jesus said. So he was trying to combat in his own day this prevalent view that was in with his own faith community that Veronica probably adopted and was surrounded by herself. And unfortunately, that religious belief still exists even today. So, even though Veronica feels cut off from God's people, perhaps even she feels cut off from God herself. She hears about a man named Jesus of Nazareth who is performing all these miracles, all these works, and she tells herself, if I can just get close enough to this man, if I can just touch the outer fringes of his garment, if I can just do that, I know I will be made whole. And if you read the story, you find out that's exactly what she does, and that's exactly what happens. And then once Jesus realizes that power has left him and that this woman's been made whole, he turns around and he says to who we're calling Veronica, he says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." So even though she's been cut off from a higher power, places of worship, even though she probably feels God is out to get her, we see that Jesus is saying that there is a connection between healing and us having faith in and connection to a higher power. She just didn't realize probably that Jesus was that higher power. He was known for being a healer. He claimed to be the Son of God. Now, the gentleman Dan Buettner, if you're not aware of him, he has done a lot of research into longevity. He's done a lot of research into healing and things of this nature and in health and wholeness. And he's studied all kinds of people around the world who enjoy a higher quality of life later in age, who are not just wasting away in a nursing home, but they're out at it. People can't tell that they're old as they are because of all the good things that he's doing. And Dan Buettner writes in his book, Thrive, just about every study done on the connection between religion and well-being shows that the two go, what? Hand in hand. While we're not sure if church-going makes you happy, or if happy people tend to be religious, research shows that people who belong to a faith-based community, regardless of the particular faith, and attend at least 4 times per month, may live as 14 years longer than people who don't. If you don't belong to a church or have drifted away from the church of your birth, seek out a new church. Start by asking friends or people you admire to make some suggestions, and try a new church in each of the next 8 weeks. So this is a man who studied things all over the world. He's seen a connection that your faith has the capacity to make you well, that being connected to a higher power influences that relationship when it's healthy, impacts your overall health and well-being. Now, he's making a challenge. Try a new church in each of the next 8 weeks. And for any of you who maybe are disconnected from church and you don't go to church, you're not a person practicing a faith, I would like you to consider and ask yourself why that is. Perhaps you have a skewed vision of who God is. Veronica had it. She had a skewed vision of who God was. She thought God was striking her down with this affliction, more than likely. And a lot of times people stay away from a higher power and don't go to a house of worship because they have a bad view of God. I know a lot of people who don't want to give religion, faith, and God a try because they have heard that the Lord is going to roast and toast and torture people throughout the ceaseless ages of eternity if they reject him. And they say, wait a minute, how in the world can you say God is a God of love and in the same breath say he's going to roast and toast me throughout the ceaseless ages of eternity if I don't accept his gift of salvation? And so most people say, no, I'm not going to have anything to do with organized religion, not going to have anything to do with God, based upon that vision of who God is that they've been given by the culture, that they've been given by their church, they've been given by their parents, or whatever, and so forth. And sometimes people don't do the heavy digging to dig a little deeper to discover that that kind of teaching, that a God of love would roast and toast people throughout the ceaseless ages of eternity, that didn't come from the Old Testament, nor did it come from Jesus himself. It actually came from Greek religion that migrated and infiltrated and became a part of Christian church tradition. So maybe if you're resisting this idea of connecting to a higher power because you think God is a monster, maybe it's time for you to do some deep digging yourself and see if he indeed is something different than you think he is. And a lot of people might resist tapping into church for the next 8 weeks because you've gone through church hurt. You've been a part of a congregation that's been abusive. leaders who have been abusive, and you've seen moral falls, and you've seen the scandal in the church, and you're thinking, well, but if the people who are supposed to know the good book can't even follow the good book, well, this is all a crock. But I would say, regardless of what your view of God is, and regardless of whatever church hurt or temple hurt or synagogue hurt or mosque hurt you may be dealing with from your past, it's in your best interests to connect to God, to connect to a higher power. So let's do a prescription. Attend religious services, and not just any religious services, and not just religious services that are recommended to you by your friends, as Dan Buettner was saying, but attend religious services where God's love is uplifted. Now, love is not wishy-washy. Love is not sugary sweet. Love is not a soft cotton candy. We're not talking about that kind of love. True love has boundaries. True love has borders. True love says no to certain things and yes to other things. And true love does take into concern justice for others. So when I say God's love is uplifted, you may be thinking, oh, he's talking about a wishy-washy, mamby-pamby, everything goes kind of church. I'm talking about a church that uplifts God's love as revealed, and I would say as revealed in the Gospels. If you need a prescription to you want to engage in a higher power, read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Jesus, when he came to this earth, said, I've come to reveal my Father. He came to reveal what the higher power is. If you've seen me, Jesus says, you've seen the Father. He's trying to reveal. And pray. If you're not praying, if you're not connecting to a higher power through prayer, these are things that you can do to improve and to enhance your relationship with the higher power, and that will improve your health as well, boil over into other relationships as well. Finally, we talked about Veronica. She had poor relationships, unhealthy relationships with other people. She was socially isolated. She was lonely. She was also cut off in her relationship with worship, with connection with God, thinking God's against her and not for her. But she also has an issue with her relationship with herself. This is a relationship we don't oftentimes take time to think of. What is your relationship with yourself? Consider the fact that she, for 12 years, think about this. Think about the impact of this. Veronica, for 12 years, has had to introduce herself not by her name, but by the word unclean. What kind of impact is that going to have upon how you view yourself, your relationship with yourself, when you say out loud with your own words and you make introductions in other people? Unclean, unclean, unclean. Not, hi, my name is Veronica. Unclean, unclean, unclean. You say that about yourself over 12 years. How is that going to impact the relationship you have with yourself and how you view yourself? You think it's going to be good, or you think it's going to be bad? It's going to be bad. It's going to be negative. What kind of relationship do you have with yourself? What are the thoughts that you ruminate upon when it deals with you? What are the things that you say to yourself about yourself? Do you consider yourself someone who's proud of yourself or not? What kind of relationship do you have with yourself? Most people don't really have a connection with their inner life and with themselves, because the emotions that we have, the things that we say about ourselves, the things that we believe about ourselves are so unpleasant, we either try to ignore it through entertainment, through social media, through other things, just keep ourselves distracted from our inner life. Or we try to deaden the turmoil within through addictions, through overeating, through sexual relationships, anything that will give enough pleasure to not think about what's going on inside. So many of us we're so disconnected with ourselves. So here's an exercise. This is part of your prescription to get more in touch and in tune with yourself, the relationship that you have with yourself. How easily can you answer this question? How are you doing? Do you get asked that question a lot? I mean, that's the way we kind of introduce ourselves to one another. Oh, you see Bob. Bob, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. Everything's going okay. Bob's telling you a lie. Things are not going well for Bob. And then Bob's going to return the favor. He's going to volley that tennis ball back over to your side of the court. He's going to say, how are you doing, Jason? And Jason says, I'm doing fine, too. Everything's great. And everything's not great with me. Saying out loud lies about how we are doing is literally disconnecting us from the truth and the reality. I might know inside that things aren't right, and I know it's probably not the best time to tell Bob how things are going wrong, and chances are Bob doesn't even want to hear it in that moment, right? But there's a problem. I'm literally disconnecting myself from myself by lying to others and lying to me about myself. There's 3 answers we typically give to people when we are being asked, how are we doing? What's your relationship with yourself? How are you doing? We either say, I'm fine, I'm tired, or I'm hungry. How are you doing? Hungry. When are we going to eat? How are you doing? I'm fine. How are you doing? I'm exhausted. I've been working so hard. Okay. How easily can you begin answering that question without using those three phrases? If you take this prescription and you say, X number, a week, a month, whatever it is, every time I'm asked that question, I'm going to eliminate those 3 answers. You're going to have to find a new vocabulary. And you're going to have to start digging deeper. And you're going to have to start getting new answers that will literally get you more in touch with the relationship that you have with yourself. Because you're either giving lies, telling people what you think that they want to hear, or you're giving surface answers that are not really helping you dig deep into the relationship that you have with your own self. So I'm fine, I'm tired, I'm hungry. Resolve that you can start answering that question differently. And it might require you telling the truth to somebody that may make them a little bit uncomfortable. Now, I'm preparing for this presentation, right? I'm digging into this. I'm already in my own life trying to do this stuff, because that's how I learned it. I was disconnected from myself. And this was the exercise that I was given to do. And as I'm preparing for this presentation, my wife, yesterday, gets rushed to she's having a problem with her blood sugar, and I have to take her to the ER. And so as she's in the ER, I'm running errands across town getting ready for this event. And so I go to the cashier, and the cashier, as she's ringing me, guess what she asks me? How are you doing today? And I'm thinking, I can't say I'm fine because I'm going to tell these people tomorrow not to do that. And so I say, I'm barely hanging on by a thread, but I'll make it through. I had to tell the truth. That may have been a little bit uncomfortable with her, but I at least had a relief that I wouldn't be lying to you and being hypocritical with this presentation, telling you not to tell people you're fine when you're not, and then I just yesterday, so at least I have a calm sense of peace and well-being about myself. Thank you so for that. So how easily can you answer the question, how you're doing, without eliminate those 3 phrases? Try to tell and answer that question honestly. And let's add to that prescription briefly. Honestly answer how you're doing today without using those 3 words. How well are you blessing yourself and taking negative thoughts about yourself captive? We have a negativity bias. That's why the news doesn't tell us good things that are happening in the world. We will tune in paying attention on all the bad things. I helped organize this event. And I can focus on the fact that, I wish there was more people that were here to hear this presentation because I worked so hard on it. And I can lose sight of focusing on the negative and not realize all the positive that happened. You got to get your questions answered by Dr. Bogus, and you gave the blood, and you got the screenings, and you got some good. I could forget all the good. We do that to ourselves. We can focus on I messed up, I screwed up, I am a mess up, I'm a screw up, and we cannot bless ourselves by acknowledging the good within us, that we're lovable, we can do good things, we are competent, and we can forget to see the good in ourselves and not bless ourselves because we're so focused on the negative. And here's another thing you can do. You can keep a gratitude journal. Or at the end of the night, at the end of the day, before going to bed, if you're married and have a spouse, you can ask your spouse, what are 3 things that you are grateful for today? And that's amazing and how it can change your attitude and sphere, because you've been worried about all the problems. You've been watching the news. You've been worried about what's going to happen with the presidency and the wars over there, whatever, and you can lose sight of how God is blessing you, how you are blessed. And now we're shifting our mindset to the good that's happening within our own world, what God is doing for you in the here and now. You can miss the blessings if you're not careful to pay attention. So this is a prescription for yourself. Now, I know I've probably gone over time, and I know this is a little bit of a darker room, and some of you are doing what Seventh-day Adventists encourage you to do on the seventh day of the week. Some of you are resting literally while I'm talking. You're resting your eyes. You're leaning over into your neighbor a little bit. So you're resting right now. So if you rested during somewhere in this talk, or you're trying to figure out what is the one thing I can take away from this presentation, this is the bottom line that we're getting to as we wrap things up. Okay, it's not clicking. There you go. All right, Dr. Dean Ornish. If you never heard of Dr. Dean Ornish, he's a big deal in the medical community. He's written a lot of books that you can find on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever. But his main claim to fame as a physician, what put him on the map, was that Dr. Ornish was able to prove that you could reverse heart disease, not through medication or surgery. You could actually reverse heart disease through lifestyle change. That was a big deal when he proved that back in the day, because people thought, no, when you had heart disease, that's it. You had to have medicine, you had to have surgery, there were no other options. Dr. Ornish writes in his book, Love and Survival, anything that promotes a sense of love and intimacy, connection and community is healing. This man has seen healing. He studied healing. He was able to figure out there was a way that heart disease could be healed that people didn't think existed or could be possible. And this is what he's saying in his book, Love and Survival. Anything that promotes a sense of love and intimacy, connection, and community is healing. And the three relationships that Veronica had that were suffering, while she suffered physically, those three relationships that she had were suffering. And she was suffering, again, like I said, maybe more from her relationship issues than she was from her physical disease. This is the bottom line. When it comes to the relationship that you have with others, the relationship you have with your higher power, with God, the relationship that you have with yourself. What can you do to create more love and intimacy, more connection and community in any of those three relationships? I'm going to close with one more piece of ancient wisdom. Jesus of Nazareth was asked by an expert in the law. Can you go one more slide? There you go. Jesus was asked, what is the greatest law? The Jewish religion had a lot of laws. And an expert in the law came to test Jesus to see what Jesus thought was the most important law of all the laws that were within the Jewish religious faith. And Jesus answered, and you shall love the Lord your God, a love relationship with a higher power. Do you view that God is a God of love? And if not, what can you do to find a God of love? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment, and the second is like this. You shall love who? We just talked about loving others, love of a higher power, healthy relationship with a higher power. Now, a healthy relationship, a loving relationship with other people. But the premise is you shall love your neighbor as what? So you have to have a loving relationship with yourself. That's the bottom line for this presentation. You have three relationships in your life. And if you can create more love and intimacy, more connection and more community in any of those relationships, and I would suggest you work on all of them, it is going to boil over. And not only you experiencing the greater spirituality realities of emotions that you want, and your character being improved, but it's going to boil over into your longevity, your body, your health, and experiencing healing. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I can devote just a few minutes to questions if you have them. I may not have the answers. You may have the questions. We'll see if I have the answers. Well, if you have questions, we'll go through that and answer them, but I want to make sure you have the hour you can get to get some food, to donate blood. By the way, we're having a blood drive. Our goal is 10 donations over the course of the day. Last I checked, we were around 6. So if you can help us go over that, please do. And for those of you who gave blood today, thank you so much. Your donation saved at least 3 lives for what you did. Are there any questions that you might have of me on anything that I shared And if not, that's fine. Go for it. Yes. Yes. That's a hot button topic for sure. But what we can say about the COVID pandemic that we do know from science it's the saying that when the tide goes out, everyone knows who's skinny dipping. That when we have a catastrophe, whenever a life event happens, we get a sense of who's prepared and who's not prepared. Everyone thinking at the beach, oh, everyone's wearing their swimsuit. But then that tide suddenly goes out, oh, you're skinny dipping, right? So when it came to COVID, most of the morbidities happened because people, unfortunately, already had health complications prior to, and COVID pushed those health problems over the edge. So certainly when it comes to a pandemic, we can see that there's risks that we have to deal with. We don't have a healthy culture. I certainly am not healthy. I'm probably pre-diabetic. I've always gone back, and I'm definitely obese, so I'm not healthy. So we have to balance between, okay, do we shut down the church? Because if we don't, if we keep it open and people come and they're already having health problems, if they get COVID, that's a health risk to them. So we have to balance the two. But the problem with sometimes the churches closed down, but the churches weren't checking on their members. The churches weren't calling their members. The churches weren't bringing baskets to the door of their members. There's things that we can do if it comes to another pandemic where it may be that churches have to close, but we can still work on the relationships. In fact, we realize now that we need to make an extra conscientious effort to be more intentional, that if we ever have to do that kind of social isolation, or people who have pre-existing conditions like diabetes or other things where COVID could be a particular health problem for them, we need to make sure that they are boosted and loved and connected to, because that's only going to help them when they're feeling more fearful and more scared of their health and well-being during that season. Yes? The COVID stuff is making another round again. Is it another disease, or is it COVID that they're worried about? We're going to have to do the social. I'm not. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm working on my mental health, so I'm not in tune with the news because it depresses me sometimes. So some of you may need to send me those articles. So yeah, we need to be thinking. Jesus did say in the scriptures that there would be more pestilences in the world as the world aged closer to his return. So we need to be conscientious, and churches need to be thinking about, if something were to happen again, how can we be more intentional? Making more phone calls, dropping things off at people, writing a card, anything that we can do to uplift someone's spirit and well-being is going to help them physically. Great observation. Thank you. Anyone else with a question and observation on what we shared? Well, thank you for spending time with me. I was worried I was going to be, talking to the stained glass. But I really enjoyed sharing this info. I hope you found it helpful and beneficial. And just as you're interested in helping your health and well-being by the things we have, the screenings and so forth, I hope you leave this place realizing that working on your relationships, your connections, love and trust in your life is going to have just as much, if not more, of an impact than some of the things that we're going to be talking about here today and the other things that you're doing. All right, we have about an hour break, and then Dr. Christopher Keeler will be back here at 1:30, and he's going to be celebrating more wholeness of body. I hope you return, and I know Dr. Keeler will give you some great things to be blessed by. He spoke at last year's event, and he was very informative, answered a lot of questions. He was very interesting to listen to. So thank you for being here. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you for coming to the celebration of wellness. Oh, yeah. We are recording these presentations, so if you want to watch this again or share what you're learning with someone else, in your welcome bag, you have a pin, and on the pin, it tells you what to go to YouTube to look up to find the videos for this recording. I should have told you that before, because if you're sitting with someone that you shouldn't be sitting with, we should have told you that, because now that's on tape, and all right. So thank you for coming. and look at the pin in your welcome bag. Do a search for in YouTube for the term we give you on that pin, and you'll find these videos and more.